A war hero walked into a courtroom wearing the nation's highest honor. The judge told him to take it off, and that one moment brought years of buried injustice to the surface. You could hear a pen drop when he walked in. Sergeant Delron Massey stood tall, even in silence. The courtroom wasn't packed, but it wasn't empty either. It was a routine civil matter in Wilmington, Delaware, on paper at least. A fellow veteran, a buddy from Fort Drum, was being sued over a contract dispute. Delron had flown up to testify as a character witness. That was all. Nothing dramatic. He wore his formal dress uniform, polished shoes, trim in place, every ribbon aligned. But it wasn't the ribbons people noticed. It was the small gold star over his heart. The Medal of Honor. When he stepped forward to take the stand, the room changed. Not because he did anything, but because he didn't have to. He just was. The bailiff cleared his throat to announce him. Sergeant Delron Massey, U.S. Army, retired. Delron's boots clicked softly across the floor. His eyes didn't scan the room. He knew where he was going. When he reached the stand and raised his right hand to be sworn in, Judge Franklin Dorsey interrupted. Hold on, the judge said. There was a pause. A long one. The clerk looked up. The attorneys glanced at each other. I need you to remove the medal. Dorsey continued. We maintain a neutral environment in this courtroom. That includes excessive insignia that could influence perception. Delron didn't move. Not out of defiance. Out of surprise. The Medal of Honor is not decor, his attorney offered cautiously. Dorsey didn't flinch. This is a court of law, not a ceremony. You could feel it. The discomfort, the disbelief, a whisper or two from the gallery. Someone recording with their phone, just low enough not to draw attention. Delron took a breath, then slowly unclipped the medal from his jacket and laid it in his lap. Not on the table, not for display, just quiet. He didn't argue. He didn't ask why. And that silence, it echoed louder than any protest could have. After testifying, Delron stepped down without a word. He didn't wait around for a handshake or acknowledgement. He exited the courtroom, medal still resting in his palm. A reporter from the Wilmington Ledger was outside, smoking near the curb. He saw the look on Delron's face. A courtroom intern followed close behind, phone still in hand. She uploaded the clip to X. By nightfall, the video had hit over 600,000 views. The caption read, Judge orders Medal of Honor recipient to remove medal in courtroom. Seriously! Veterans groups began tagging their chapters. Activists questioned the judge's conduct. Civilians who knew nothing about military decorum still knew enough to say, That's wrong. Judge Dorsey refused to comment. But Delron didn't say anything either. He drove back to his hotel, didn't check his phone, didn't post a statement. He sat at the edge of the bed and looked out the window at the parking lot. No anger, no outrage, just stillness. Later that night, he called his mom. You okay? She asked. Yeah, he replied. Just tired. She waited, knowing there was more. He made me take it off, Delron added. Said it was too much. There was a pause. You earned that with your hands, your feet, and your blood, she said softly. Some folks don't know what respect smells like until they choke on it. Delron didn't reply. Just sat there, letting her words settle. But what no one knew yet was how deep the damage really went, and how far it would reach. 2 days later, Delron was back in Chesapeake, Virginia. No press, no statements. Just him and Boone, his Labrador mix, on their usual trail behind the church parking lot. He wore an old navy hoodie and gym shorts. To anyone watching, he looked like another guy walking his dog. But around here, people knew him. Not because he wanted that. They just did. At the corner store, they'd say, "Thank you, sir," and shake his hand like it was instinct. The mail carrier left notes for him when the forecast looked rough, and every once in a while, a stranger would leave a little flag or handmade card at the base of his mailbox. Delron never made a fuss about it, never even told his neighbors about the medal. Some of them only found out after that courtroom video blew up. But long before all this, long before Syria and Fort Drum and the day that changed his life, Delron was just a kid from South Norfolk with a steady voice and an uncanny way of sitting in stillness. He was raised by his mother, Cora Massey, a retired hospice nurse who believed in sharp edges and soft words. His father, Bernard, had died when Delron was 14, heart attack. Sudden. A quiet man too, but one who believed that showing up on time and speaking with purpose were signs of strength. That stuck. Delron enlisted at 19. Infantry. Not because he loved combat. He didn't, but because he wanted to carry something heavier than himself. He liked responsibility. He understood pressure. After his second deployment, he was chosen for the Tomb Guard detail at Arlington. Most people don't know how hard that is. The selection, the discipline, the hours of training just to walk in silence with precision, the inspections so brutal a wrinkle in a sock could send you back to square one. But Delron passed, one of only a few black guards ever assigned there. And when tourists leaned over the rails with their phones and kids asked questions too loud, Delron never flinched. Not once. He'd just walk, step by step, day after day. Then came the third deployment. Northeastern Syria, 2018. Things escalated fast. An ambush. Civilians caught in a crossfire near a Red Crescent post. Smoke. Screams. His unit was pinned. Radio contact broken. Delron led a split team to flank the attackers, not to retaliate, but to create an escape path for medics and wounded. He carried 2 injured soldiers back himself, under fire. One didn't make it. The other credited Delron with saving his life. A month later, he was pulled from active rotation and quietly informed he was being considered for the Medal of Honor. He didn't tell anyone, not even Cora, until 2 weeks before the ceremony. And even then, he framed it like a scheduling conflict. The ceremony happened behind closed doors with only family, his commanding officers, and select members of Congress present. Delron wore the medal once on TV. After that, it stayed tucked inside a small velvet pouch in his zip-pack drawer. He told his friend Julius once, "Wearing it feels like stealing someone else's voice. The guys who didn't come back? They earned it more." But when he agreed to testify in Delaware, Julius had urged him to wear it. "You think small in front of small people, you get smaller," Julius had said. "Wear the damn thing. You're not the one who should be quiet." Delron had nodded. Quietly. The way he did. Back home now, with Boone trotting ahead on the trail, Delron stopped under the shade of a tall pine, pulled the medal from his pocket, and just looked at it. He didn't feel angry. He felt like someone had looked him in the face and asked him not to exist so loudly. Cora brought him tea that night without saying much. She'd always given him space, even when she didn't agree. But as she handed him the mug, she paused. "You going to let him get away with it?" she asked. He looked up at her. "I'm not sure what get away with it means yet," he replied. She raised an eyebrow, then gave him the smallest smile. "Well, just don't sit so long you forget how to stand." But while Delron had moved on from war, the courtroom wasn't his first battlefield, and it wouldn't be his last. 2 mornings later, Delron met up with Julius Rowe at Carter's Diner, just off Compostela Road. They sat in the booth near the back, under the dusty ceiling fan that always made a clicking sound when it turned. The waitress already knew their order: black coffee for both, scrambled eggs for Julius, and turkey sausage for Delron. Julius, former Marine, 22 years of service, had that look about him, shoulders that didn't relax even when he smiled. He'd known Delron for over a decade. They weren't best friends, just 2 men who understood each other without needing many words. "You know, I watched that clip like 20 times, Julius said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "He didn't just tell you to take it off. He made you disappear." Delron didn't answer right away. He was still watching the steam rise from his cup. "I wasn't trying to make a statement," Delron said. "It was just the uniform. That's how I wear it." "You didn't have to make a statement," Julius replied. "The medal made it for you." That sat heavy between them. Julius leaned back and crossed his arms. "You ever seen him do that to anybody else? Tell a Silver Star guy to take his pin off? Or a sheriff to ditch the badge? No, because it wasn't about the medal. It was about who was wearing it." Delron didn't argue. He just shook his head slowly. "I keep wondering," he said quietly. "If I had said no, if I had refused, what would have happened?" Julius snorted. "He'd probably have held you in contempt, or found some excuse to clear the courtroom. That's the thing about people like Dorsey. They don't like being challenged. Not out loud, not in public, especially not by someone who can't be ignored." Delron looked at his old friend. "I wasn't trying to challenge him." "You didn't have to." Julius sipped his coffee again. "You walked in there with a truth he couldn't control. And he panicked. A few booths away, someone whispered Delron's name. A middle-aged man stood near the counter and offered a small salute, then left. Delron gave him a quick nod of acknowledgement. "See that?" Julius said, nodding toward the door. "That's why people are talking. They know when something's off, even if they can't name it." Delron sighed. "I didn't ask for this. I just went to support a friend." "Doesn't matter. It found you anyway." They finished breakfast in quiet. But as they walked back to their trucks, Julius said something that lingered. "You have a choice now. You can stay quiet. Or you can start talking." Delron didn't reply. That night, after walking Boone and locking up, he found himself staring at the medal again. Still inside the velvet pouch, still tucked in the sock drawer under the neatly folded whites. He took it out and held it in his hand. It felt heavier than usual. He thought about that courtroom, how fast the air had shifted, how suddenly he went from witness to distraction, like his very presence was too complicated, too loud. He turned it over in his hand. There was no glamour in it, just responsibility. Then he opened his laptop. There were already over 300 emails in his inbox. Subject lines like, "We stand with you," and "A veteran's voice matters." Most were from strangers. A few were from old comrades he hadn't spoken to in years. One was from the family of a soldier he'd carried off the field in Syria. He didn't open them. Not yet. Instead, he clicked on the video again, the one the intern had uploaded. He watched himself walk across the courtroom, saw the moment the judge raised his hand, froze the frame just before he unclipped the medal. He looked calm. But now he realized what Julius meant. That wasn't just a man being silenced. It was a message being erased. And not just to him, but to anyone who looked like him, who served like him, who had earned something in a country that still questioned the value of their presence. The next morning, he responded to one email, then another, then 10. And then he made a call to someone who could help him figure out what came next. But before Delron could even speak, others had already started digging. Sierra Lang didn't like silence, not in courtrooms, not in print, and definitely not from people in power. At 31, she was already known around Delaware for being a sharp journalist who asked the questions others tiptoed around. She didn't go for gossip or gotchas. Her work was built on patterns, quiet details, connecting things most people missed. When the video of Judge Franklin Dorsey ordering Delron Massey to remove his Medal of Honor went viral, Sierra didn't jump to react. She watched it 5 times, then sat back in her tiny apartment outside Newark and did what she always did when something didn't sit right. She started digging. She remembered covering a story 3 years earlier about a Latino Marine whose testimony had been dismissed in family court. Same judge, different tone, but same thread. Dorsey had ruled that the man's military trauma clouded his judgment and struck down his character statement entirely. At the time, it barely made a ripple. But now? She pulled that case again and looked deeper. The name was Staff Sergeant Luis Barrera, served in Fallujah. Honorable discharge. No criminal history. Lost joint custody of his daughter based on Dorsey's ruling that he lacked emotional regulation. Sierra remembered interviewing Barrera briefly, but it hadn't gone anywhere back then. She opened a fresh folder and titled it, Dorsey. Patterns. 3 hours later, she had 5 more cases, each involving minority veterans, where Dorsey had found subtle ways to discredit or minimize their presence in court. Language like distracting uniform presence or prior service not being directly relevant. One even called a veteran's Bronze Star potentially prejudicial to jury sentiment. She didn't want to jump to conclusions. That's not how she worked. But it was a thread worth pulling. Sierra reached out to a court reporter she trusted, Marnie Keller. Marnie had worked in Dorsey's courtroom for years before taking early retirement. "You really want to go there?" Marnie asked over the phone. "I'm already there," Sierra replied. There was a long pause. Then Marnie said, "He never shouted, never swore, but he had a way of making you feel like presence alone was an offense, especially if you wore your story on your sleeve. Did he treat white officers the same?" Sierra asked. Marnie didn't answer right away. "Let's just say I've seen sheriffs walk in with their badges shining, and he never blinked," she said. Sierra started typing. She published a short column the next day. Not accusatory, just factual. Titled, "Judicial Consistency or Selective Respect. A Look at Judge Dorsey's Courtroom History." It laid out 6 cases, listed the rulings, quoted the transcripts. No commentary, just the facts. She ended it with a single question. Why does military service command respect in some cases and resistance in others? The article picked up speed. Veteran groups started sharing it. Local TV stations called for interviews. Sierra declined. She wasn't after attention. She wanted accountability. Then her inbox started filling up. An anonymous email from a paralegal who had worked in Dorsey's chambers for 4 years. Another from a public defender who said she'd kept her mouth shut too long. By the end of the week, Sierra had a stack of notes, emails, and internal memos from people who'd seen the judge operate behind the scenes. One memo described a case from 2016, where Dorsey quietly redirected a jury pool after noticing 2 jurors had military insignia pins on their jackets. No official reason, just juror reshuffling for neutrality. Another described him referring to a black Navy officer as a potential influence on emotionally unstable jurors. Sierra knew she needed to be careful. She didn't want to sensationalize it, but the story was writing itself. She reached out to Delron next. He didn't answer her first email, or the second, but on the third he wrote back, "Appreciate your work. Not ready to talk. Not yet." That was enough. Sierra kept going. She submitted a formal request for Dorsey's public record rulings through the Delaware Judicial Council. She reached out to the local bar association. Quietly but persistently, she gathered the puzzle pieces. And all the while, the comment section under her article kept growing. People weren't just angry, they were remembering. Stories they'd buried. Moments they thought no one would believe. But while the reports got louder, Delron did the opposite. He disappeared for a while. Delron hadn't posted anything since returning from Wilmington. He barely checked his social media. The video, the interviews, the think pieces. It was too much. He didn't like being talked about like a symbol, especially by people who didn't know a thing about him. But the mail kept coming. First, it was a manila envelope left on his porch. No return address. Inside was a handwritten note from a woman in Charleston who said her brother had served in Iraq and was buried in silence when he came home. She wrote, "You didn't speak, but somehow you said what he never could." Then came a card from a retired firefighter in Milwaukee. Then a bundle of letters from high school students in Albany. And every day, more envelopes showed up. Most with shaky handwriting, some with drawings, a few with folded flags. Delron didn't know what to do with them. At first, he stacked them in a shoebox on the kitchen table. Then it became 2 boxes, then 3. One letter stuck out. It came in a bright red envelope. Inside was a note written in blue crayon, pressed so hard it left imprints on the back of the paper. "Dear Mr. Massey, my name is Terrence Clay. I am 12 and live in Camden, New Jersey. I saw the video of you in court. I told my mom that you looked like a superhero. She said you're a real soldier. I want to be one too. I didn't know people could be mean to heroes. I think you are brave even when you didn't say anything. Please don't feel bad. Some people just don't know how to act. Your friend, Terrence." Delron held the letter for a long time. There was a drawing on the back. Delron standing on what looked like a courtroom floor, metal glowing like a comic book emblem. A tiny judge behind a huge desk was saying something in a speech bubble. "Take it off!" While the character version of Delron calmly replied, "No," he smiled. Terrence had rewritten the ending. That night, Delron sat at the kitchen table long after Cora had gone to bed. Boone curled up at his feet. The boxes of letters were stacked to his left, but he kept Terence's in front of him. He picked up a pen and flipped the paper over. Then thought better of it. He grabbed a clean sheet and started fresh. Dear Terence, thank you for your letter. I think superheroes are quiet more than people realize. They also get tired sometimes. But they keep standing up, not because they want to fight, but because some things are worth holding on to. I was proud to wear that medal, but more proud to take care of my people, even when it's hard. Keep being curious, keep asking questions, and take care of your mom. That's a big job. Your friend, Mr. Massey. He folded it neatly, placed it in an envelope, and addressed it to the return name on the back. No fanfare, no signature flourish, just honesty. He sent 5 more letters the next morning, then 10 more after that. He started setting aside an hour a day, mornings mostly, before walking Boone, to respond. He kept the language simple, never dramatic, just real. Just what he wished someone had told him when he came home for the first time and didn't recognize the silence in his own house. One day, he opened a card from an army widow in Vermont who wrote, "My husband never got to wear his medals, but I think he would have stood beside you in that courtroom." Delron read it 3 times. He wasn't trying to be a voice, but the letters kept showing up. One morning, Cora found him asleep at the table, pen still in hand, half a letter written. She didn't wake him, just set a folded blanket over his shoulders and left a sticky note by his elbow. "One voice makes room for others, even if it whispers." Delron looked at the note when he woke, still groggy. He smiled, rubbed his eyes, and picked up the pen again. But while Delron healed quietly, Judge Dorsey decided it was time to speak up, and made things worse. Judge Franklin Dorsey was not used to public criticism. For most of his 28-year legal career, he kept a low profile, never the subject of praise, but never scandal either. His reputation was by the book, maybe too by the book. He preferred silence over attention, formality over warmth. It worked in court, not so much outside it. But the internet was not a courtroom, and in the weeks after the Massey video went viral, Dorsey's name was dragged across national headlines, veteran forums, and Sunday roundtables. He hadn't expected the backlash to last. He thought the news cycle would move on. It didn't. So, after a few firm nudges from a local PR consultant and his brother-in-law, both convinced his silence was making it worse, Dorsey agreed to appear on a local public radio show. Capitol Square Talks, hosted by Martin Levin. The plan was simple: clarify the courtroom protocol, steer the conversation toward decorum, and move on. But clarity only works when you're willing to hear the other side. The interview aired live on a Tuesday morning. Martin Levin introduced him politely. Dorsey responded in a crisp, flat voice. "Thank you for having me." Levin didn't waste time. "Judge, let's begin with the moment itself. Why ask a Medal of Honor recipient to remove something he earned at such a cost?" Dorsey cleared his throat. "In my courtroom, consistency matters. All parties are expected to appear without symbols or attire that might sway perception, be it political pins, religious items, or military insignia." "Sure," Levin replied, "but a Medal of Honor isn't a campaign sticker. It's the highest military recognition this country gives. Don't you think the symbolism there deserves respect?" "I'm not questioning his service," Dorsey answered. "I'm protecting the fairness of the proceedings. Emotions can influence outcomes. My responsibility is neutrality." The word neutrality stuck in the air like smoke. Levin pressed gently. "Respectfully, Judge, many feel that moment went beyond neutrality, that it looked and felt like erasure." There was a pause. Dorsey responded slowly. "We've become a culture that rewards performance over process. I refuse to run a courtroom governed by sentiment. That may not be popular, but it's correct." That line made headlines within hours. By mid-afternoon, hashtags like performance over process and hashtag Dorsey out were trending. Veterans from all over the country started posting their medals, their stories, and more importantly, the quiet ways they'd been sidelined. By evening, 3 retired judges had issued statements distancing themselves from Dorsey's remarks. One of them, Judge Horace Winfield, was especially pointed. Fairness in the courtroom must never become a shield to dismiss the humanity of those who've sacrificed for this nation. If dignity disrupts your court, you're presiding over the wrong kind of justice. That quote made it to the front page of the Delaware Sun-Times. Sierra Lang embedded it in her next article. But perhaps the most devastating response came from someone Dorsey had ruled against, Luis Barrera. He posted a short video in response to the judge's radio interview. Standing in front of his daughter's school, Barrera spoke calmly. Judge Dorsey once said I was too emotional to raise my daughter because I cried when I talked about Fallujah. He said emotion clouds judgment. I think maybe it's fear that clouds his. That clip hit 1.2 million views within 24 hours. Dorsey issued no follow-up statement. He cancelled a second interview that had been planned with a regional news outlet. His office claimed a scheduling conflict, but no one believed that. Sierra published another piece titled, Process versus Presence, What the Dorsey Interview Missed. In it, she wrote, Judicial integrity doesn't require the erasure of lived experience. If the Medal of Honor disturbs a court's sense of balance, perhaps the imbalance lies elsewhere. Lawyers began organizing petitions to have Dorsey reviewed by the state's Judicial Ethics Committee. The Bar Association, long silent, issued a lukewarm statement that said, all judges must be aware of the optics and implications of their decisions in modern society. For many, that was too little. Too late. But for Delron Massey, watching all this unfold from his living room couch, the reaction wasn't satisfying. It just felt heavy. He hadn't wanted Dorsey humiliated. He hadn't even wanted an apology. He just wanted the truth to be seen for what it was. Without armor. Without defense. Boone rested his head on Delron's lap as the radio interview replayed on the TV. He muted it. But public anger wasn't just noise anymore. It triggered something that couldn't be ignored. The official notice came on a Thursday. Typed on letterhead from the Delaware Commission on Judicial Conduct, it was addressed to Judge Franklin Dorsey and marked confidential. Ethics review initiated. But the leak happened before the envelope even hit his desk. By the following morning, the Delaware Courier published a breaking alert. Judicial Commission opens ethics review into Judge Franklin Dorsey's courtroom conduct. It wasn't just about Delron anymore. The review listed at least 8 past cases under preliminary examination, all with recurring themes. Statements about military presence, courtroom neutrality, and unprompted commentary on emotional demeanor. Sierra Lang was ready. She released a follow-up article that morning. More than one moment, a decade of patterns in Dorsey's courtroom. Her sources had grown, from anonymous court clerks to former paralegals, junior attorneys, even a law student who had interned under Dorsey 2 summers ago. In one excerpt from a 2016 transcript, Dorsey had remarked, "A Purple Heart doesn't qualify you to interpret law, only to survive chaos." He'd said it in response to an Army veteran who tried to testify in a domestic dispute case involving his own brother. That veteran's statement was struck from the record. The quote hit hard. It made its way onto protest signs that popped up outside the Wilmington courthouse within hours. Veterans, activists, and civilians stood in front of the steps holding signs like, "Surviving chaos is what qualifies us. Honor isn't optional." The story hit national media again. Late-night hosts brought it up, not as a punchline, but as a question. One anchor asked on air, "If a courtroom is where truth is supposed to matter most, why is it silencing the people who've already risked everything to protect it?" Behind the scenes, the commission began conducting interviews. Courtroom staff, legal aides, and clerks were subpoenaed. Some tried to stay vague. Others didn't hold back. A former clerk named Simone Brenner gave a recorded statement. He never used slurs, never raised his voice, but he had a way of brushing off certain people who didn't wear a certain kind of polish. He thought quiet disrespect was more dignified. But it still stings. Meanwhile, the commission requested Dorsey's full case history from 2010 onward. His decisions were compared side by side. Cases involving military witnesses, Black or Latino plaintiffs, or any litigants who wore visible markers of service, like uniforms, medals, even dog tags, showed consistent downplaying or outright restrictions. One moment stood out. A 2013 custody case where a Navy officer was told not to wear his uniform to court. When he complied, Dorsey noted in his ruling that the absence of external symbolism allowed for a more neutral observation of character. It sounded polished, respectable even, but when Sierra included it in her report, she followed it with a single sentence. He meant it was easier to judge a man when his dignity wasn't visible. More complaints followed. One from a retired Air Force nurse, another from the widow of a Marine who had testified in a VA benefits hearing Dorsey presided over. Each voice added weight. Public defenders began revisiting old cases, checking if courtroom bias could have influenced outcomes. Some even drafted motions for appeals based on emerging patterns. Meanwhile, Judge Dorsey remained behind closed doors. His official spokesperson issued a cold, calculated response. Judge Dorsey stands by the integrity of his courtroom and will fully comply with any inquiry deemed necessary. But his grip was slipping. The legal world in Delaware, usually tight-lipped and cautious, began to shift. Lawyers started quietly distancing themselves. Prosecutors who'd once praised his orderliness now called it rigidity. Former colleagues expressed concern. At home in Chesapeake, Delron heard about the inquiry not through the news, but from his friend Julius, who showed up at his door with 2 coffees and a folded newspaper. "They're coming for him," Julius said, placing the coffee on the kitchen table. "Not with pitchforks, with records." Delron looked at the headline but said nothing. "You okay with that?" Julius asked. Delron nodded once. "It's not about revenge," he said. "It's about repair." That night he walked Boone along the same trail behind the church. The air was heavy with early summer heat, and fireflies flickered like they were watching. He didn't feel victorious. He felt steady. Cora was on the porch when he got back. "They asked you to be loud," she said, rocking slowly in her chair. "But your silence was the part they couldn't handle." Delron sat beside her. Neither said much for a while, but for all the hearings and headlines, something even stronger was building far from the spotlight. The invitation came in a yellow envelope with a return address from Camden, New Jersey. Inside was a note on school letterhead. Simple and kind. "Mr. Massey, we're holding a Veterans and Leaders Day at McKinley Middle School next month. Terence Clay, a 7th grader here, said you wrote back to him. He's shared your letter with every teacher in our building. It would mean the world if you came to speak." Delron read it twice. He hadn't planned to travel again. Not for speeches, not for cameras. But this wasn't a news crew. This was a kid. A real one, with crayon drawings and questions bigger than his frame. So a week later, Delron took a quiet drive up I-95. Just him, a duffel bag, and Boone in the back seat. He didn't pack a suit. Just slacks, a button-down, and his medal, though he still hadn't decided whether to wear it. McKinley Middle looked like a lot of schools. Brown brick, peeling railings, and a playground that had seen better decades. But the kids were buzzing. A banner on the fence read, "Honor Week, meet our local heroes." Crayon flags decorated the windows. Inside, the gym had folding chairs in crooked rows, paper stars taped to the walls, a microphone perched on a milk crate. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. Delron waited in the back until his name was called. A few parents were scattered near the bleachers. Teachers whispered to each other as he walked to the front. Terence was sitting cross-legged in the second row, face beaming. His hand shot up in a mini wave. Delron nodded back. No big show, just a little gesture. He didn't speak from notes. He just looked out at the rows of kids, some slouched, some whispering, some not paying attention at all, and said, "My name is Delron Massey. I'm from Chesapeake, Virginia. I was in the Army for 17 years. I did 3 tours overseas. I stood guard at Arlington National Cemetery. And a few weeks ago, a judge told me to take off something I earned." Some of the students sat up. "I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just took it off. Not because I was ashamed, but because I knew I didn't need to prove anything in that room. I know who I am." He paused. Let the quiet settle. "Sometimes the world will ask you to shrink. It'll call that humility. But shrinking isn't the same as being quiet. Being quiet is a choice. Shrinking is something they want from you so they can take up more space." More heads turned toward him now. You don't have to be loud to be strong. You just have to be honest. And when you know the truth about who you are, where you've been, and what you've done, you don't have to fight every battle. Sometimes, the hardest thing is staying still. A hand went up. Not Terence's, a girl in the third row. Were you scared that day? Delron didn't blink. No, but I was tired. Another hand, a boy in a hoodie. Did you feel small? Delron smiled just a little. For a minute. Then I remembered. He couldn't take anything from me that I didn't hand over. The room got quiet again. Not the uncomfortable kind. The listening kind. After the talk, Terence ran up with a new drawing. It was a picture of Delron sitting on a porch with an older woman and a dog. The medal was back on his chest. In a bubble over his head it said, "I still got it." Delron laughed. "You're getting better at these." Terence grinned. "You gonna wear it next time?" "I think I will," Delron said. "Thanks for reminding me." On the drive home, Boone snored softly in the back seat. Delron kept thinking about the question. Did you feel small? And how a kid that young had found the one thing most adults danced around. He didn't feel small anymore. Not because of anything grand he'd said, but because telling the truth out loud, even to a bunch of middle schoolers, made the weight shift. Back in Chesapeake, Cora was waiting with a pot of gumbo and a story about the neighbor's busted mailbox. He sat down with her that night, medal still in his bag, and for the first time since the courtroom, he took it out and placed it on the kitchen counter. Not to show off, just to let it breathe. But as Delron found peace, Dorsey was losing his grip. And fast. The letter of resignation was brief, 3 paragraphs. Typed, not signed by hand. No apology, no admission of wrongdoing. Just a sterile note addressed to the Chief Justice of Delaware, citing ongoing distractions incompatible with continued judicial service. Judge Franklin Dorsey was stepping down. Word broke mid-morning, first leaked by a court clerk, then confirmed by the Commission's press secretary in a statement read without emotion. The public was notified, and just like that, 28 years of bench time ended in silence. But not everyone stayed silent. Within an hour, Sierra Lang published her final installment, The Man Who Never Raised His Voice. It was unlike her other pieces, less clinical, more reflective. She opened with a quote from a 2012 transcript, one where Dorsey had gently chastised a veteran for speaking with too much pride in front of the jury. Then she wrote, "This isn't just about a robe, or a bench, or a moment of overreach. This is about how dignity is sometimes treated like a disruption when it doesn't come in the right wrapping. It's about the quiet ways power makes people disappear." Franklin Dorsey never shouted, but what he did said plenty. It hit a nerve. The story trended nationally again. But now the tone was different. Less outrage, more reckoning. Several judges around the state quietly reviewed their own past conduct. Legal panels began circulating internal memos, advising sensitivity toward service members, especially those testifying while in uniform. For once, the conversation wasn't about one man. It was about culture. Public defenders reopened closed cases. A few veterans, including Luis Barrera, filed motions for retrial based on Dorsey's historical bias. A young prosecutor named Evan Chernick posted a thread on X that read, in part, "I practiced in Judge Dorsey's court for 5 years. I always wondered why he seemed colder toward veterans who didn't look like what he expected. I said nothing. That was cowardice. I won't make that mistake again." His post got nearly 500,000 likes. Meanwhile, protest signs disappeared from the courthouse steps. Veterans groups moved on to other fights. But the name Dorsey now sat beside a list of judges whose fall was tied not to corruption, but to something quieter, and in some ways more dangerous, selective respect. Delron heard about the resignation from Sierra herself. She called late in the evening. "I figured you should know before the rest of the country finds out. I appreciate that," he said. There was a pause. "I didn't write any of this to make you a symbol, Delron," she said. "I hope you know that." "I know," he replied. "You just gave the silence a name." They talked for a few more minutes, then said goodbye. No big moment, no emotional endnote, just mutual understanding. Delron stood outside afterward, barefoot on the porch. Boone paced near the mailbox. The sky was streaked with orange, fading to purple. Cora came out holding 2 glasses of iced tea. "So, he's gone," Delron nodded. "You feel anything?" He thought for a second. "Like I need to sweep the porch." She smiled. "That's about right." They sat together quietly, 2 glasses sweating in the heat. The crickets starting to sing. Inside, the medal sat in its case on the hallway shelf now. Not hidden, not displayed. Just placed there like something that belonged. No spotlight, no curtain call. Later that week, Delron received a package from Terrence's school. Inside was a small wooden plaque the students had made. It said, "You made us listen." Below it, a list of names. Kids who'd drawn pictures, written cards, and asked questions because of one man's stillness in a courtroom. Delron hung it near the front door. Not for the world, just for himself. But the last word didn't belong to the court. It belonged to Delron, and a promise he made long ago. The fall air in Camden carried the scent of chalk and pavement as Delron stepped out of his rental car. It was his second visit to McKinley Middle School, but this time he wasn't here to speak. He had something to deliver. Tucked beneath his arm was a framed copy of Terence Clay's original letter, the one written in blue crayon with the superhero drawing on the back. He'd taken it to a local shop in Chesapeake and had it matted under protective glass, along with his handwritten reply. He didn't announce he was coming. He didn't ask for attention. But when he walked through the school's front door, the secretary's eyes widened. "You're Mr. Massey," he nodded. "Is Terence here today?" 10 minutes later, Terence came down the hall wearing a faded hoodie and sneakers that squeaked on the tile. His eyes lit up the moment he saw Delron. "You really came back?" "I told you I might," Delron said. "I don't like breaking promises." He handed the boy the frame. "I wanted you to have this. You reminded me of something important, that we don't always need to speak loudly to be heard." Terence looked down at the frame, then up again. "My mom said I should write more letters. I started doing it in class." "That's a good habit," Delron said. "Words travel farther than people sometimes." They sat together on a bench near the library. A teacher passed by and smiled, but didn't interrupt. Boone sat patiently near the doors, his leash looped over Delron's wrist. Terence glanced at the medal pinned to Delron's chest. He hadn't worn it the first time. "You brought it this time." "Yeah," Delron said. "Thought it deserved a little sunlight. Does it feel heavy? Some days." Delron said. "Other days, it feels like armor. Just depends on what I'm carrying with it." Terence looked back at the frame. "Do you think I could earn one of these?" Delron didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked, "You want to protect people?" Terence nodded. "I want to help. I don't like bullies." "Then you're already doing more than most." Before he left, Delron gave Terence something else. A new notebook, blank pages waiting for stories. "Write everything," he said. "Even the parts that don't make sense yet. That's how we figure them out." Back in Chesapeake, things were quiet again. Letters still came, fewer now, but no less meaningful. One from a retired judge in Kansas, one from a young Marine stationed in Okinawa, one from a mother whose son had seen Delron's story and changed the way he carried himself at school. Delron started something small but steady, a local mentorship group for returning veterans who felt lost in their own neighborhoods. They met at the library once a week. No speeches, no structure, just space. He didn't advertise it. He didn't brand it. He just showed up and listened. Sometimes that was all a man needed. Cora helped too. She cooked for the meetings, made jokes the younger vets didn't always understand, and reminded everyone that stillness wasn't weakness, it was strategy. One evening, after the last person left and Boone had curled into a nap at Delron's feet, he sat down at the kitchen table and took out a fresh sheet of paper, not for a statement, for a letter. "To the one who thinks silence is the only answer, I want you to know something. You don't have to raise your voice to leave a mark. You don't have to win an argument to make a point. Sometimes you just have to stay where you are, even when someone's trying to move you. That's how we protect things. Our name, our dignity, our place in the world. And when the moment passes, you'll still be standing. And they'll remember that you didn't move. Keep walking, Delron. He folded the paper, slipped it into an envelope, and added it to the box marked "To Send." That's how legacy works. Not in the noise, but in the weight of words carried forward by those who needed them most. Respect isn't granted by a title, or a robe, or a rank. It's earned, and sometimes it's protected by the ones who know how much it costs. If you believe this story matters, if Delron's quiet strength reminded you of someone you know, consider subscribing to the channel. There are more stories worth hearing, and more voices that deserve to be remembered.